It's insane when you consider the message of this film is that an ignorant populace is an inactive one, and the only way for evil to get up and do something is for the populace to stand by and do nothing. You have a populace who doesn't want to watch a film like this. They want to watch a film about a furry blue alien that's a live-action recreation of a Disney film that came out decades ago.
Nice.
The irony is insane.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our co-host, Andrew, to review the latest release in the cinemas. That's right, we're talking about the historical film Nuremberg, which was a 2025 American historical drama film, which was written, co-produced, and directed by James Vanderbilt from the good old Vanderbilt family. It's based on The Nazi and the Psychiatrist by Jack L. High. So, as always, you want those initial impressions. We're going to give those to you today to give you a little taste of what exactly my thoughts were walking into this. You have to understand the rules that I play by when it comes to reviewing things. I like my takes here to be fresh, as authentic as I can make them, which means I generally try to say anything about a film after I walk out of it in the theaters. If I do that, generally it's something along the lines of like, what is this? What is going on? And that's because the movie was so bad that I just couldn't deal with it and had to say something, right? That happened with The Dead Don't Hurt, for example, which was a horrible, horrible disappointment to what I was expecting. Tron Ares also had just a little bit of that sneaking in. So normally if I say something, that's not a good sign. This is the very first time I said something before the podcast in a positive direction. I couldn't help myself. This, hands down, I think is the best film that's come out this year. It's one of the best films I've seen for sure in the past 5 years. It is got a lot of good things going for it. And I thought very highly of it. I don't think it's the best movie ever, right? I'm not going to say that. I think there is definitely some things that it's a little harder to take well, given a historical film. But this one hit a lot of amazing points. I was very happy with what I saw, and it was very sobering at the same time. So my end review was a 7.75.
I was surprised that we got a film like this in the year 2025. Not only because I think it is phenomenal, both in the story that it's telling and how well it captivates the audience, but also because of the messages that are being portrayed, the themes they're exploring, and the conclusions that the protagonist comes to. I think it's a very heavy film. I think it's very dark, even though it's not per se graphic for a majority of the film. There are definitely graphic portions of this film, quite a few,
Sure.
but majority of the film is spent in dialogue, in character interactions. This isn't like a Gladiator or John Wick film in the sense that it's gory constantly. But the themes and the ideas and the people's discussions that are happening they're not light. So if you do watch this movie, make sure that when you do so, you're approaching it with the idea that what they're saying matters constantly. If you like action movies, this is not for you. But I think this should be a movie that every eligible adults for voting in the United States should probably watch at some point in their life. Because I think it pertains both to the current day as well as the past. So my overall rating was an 8.1.
There we go. So we're both pretty close there. Both high accolades, right? There's something for that. Sometimes Andrew gives a stupid review like an 8.6 to something that deserves a 5.5, but this time we're in somewhat agreement.
I mean, we were in agreement last time when we did Pirates 4.
I was talking about Pirates 3, but yes.
Oh, yeah, well, Hey, Maverick didn't give this movie as high praise as it should, because he's still below an 8 right now.
I mean, I could be convinced to go higher. I will say that. I could be convinced. One thing I do think, just going off of what Andrew said, this does have some very graphic scenes. You will see actual footage of concentration camps in the film, some disturbing imagery around hangings. So I would probably not take the kids to see this film. That being said, I would highly recommend it. If you have any inkling to watch it, I would say do that before going into the review, because there is spoilers, as there always are. I mean, that being said, this is a historical film, so if you don't have an inkling of where it's going, then like you probably don't know history. So it's pretty obvious it's about the Nuremberg Trials. But we're gonna get into it. I think that's enough of the lead in for our thoughts on this film before we get into the nitty gritty. Andrew, you want to give everyone a summary of what Nuremberg is all about before we get started?
In short, this film is a story about the psychiatrist who was in charge of evaluating 22 officers that remained of the Nazi leadership. The head of these survivors was Goring, the second in command of the Third Reich, and he functions as the film's main antagonist. The film explores Kelley, Dr. Kelley, the main character's interactions with Goring, as well as the dynamic between him, the justice that is prosecuting from the United States, and how the conclusions he comes to as a result of his discussions with Goring. As he says in the film, over 1,000 hours. He knew this man better than anyone on Earth, and ultimately how this all played out at the Nuremberg Trials. Or in this case, they really only show the beginning of that.
Yeah, it's like, what, a 10-month process, I believe, and they only show basically the discussions between the prosecution and Goring, right?
Yeah, I mean, they also there were way more officers tried than the
Correct,
22, yeah. And so their focus is on Goring and the precedents that were set, not only for international law following this, but for the rest of those trials.
Right. And that was a big thing. The big thing about the time was that nothing like a trial like this had occurred previously. It was always contained within a nation's jurisdiction, right? Even if it was war crimes that were being tried. And this was the first time it was done on an international scale at the international level. So there's a lot of new ground being broken in this film from a historical standpoint. And then, of course, all of the atrocities tied to the concentration camps and whatnot is also a huge point of discussion in this film. So let's get into it. We start off with that opening scene. The opening scene, you see that the United States military is in Europe. They have taken out a lot of Hitler's power. Now you hear that Hitler is dead, and you see that there are German officers trying to flee the country. And one of those officers gets stopped on the way out and gets arrested. Turns out it's Hermann Goring. What are your thoughts on that opening scene, the introduction to him, and then getting the psychiatrist involved as he gets off the train at Nuremberg?
I think they do the doctor really well, in the sense that he shows up almost like a kid in an amusement park. He has, and this comes into play a lot more when you realize the contrast at the end of the film, he has the stereotypical American sentiment towards the Nazis. They are these inhuman creatures that have committed these atrocities, and yet they're fascinating to him because he studies psychology. So what makes men like this tick? In his mind, there must be something unique about them, and he wants to find out what is that unique factor that causes a man to do the things the Nazis did. And so when he first arrives, he's like, I want to talk to all of them. Introduce me. I need to see them. I need to speak to them. And he's like writing notes down in his notebook. This one guy's following him around. I think the introduction for him was great, and it sets up the rest of his journey through this film amazingly. So
yeah, and you have also on the flip side the introduction to the character of Hermann Goring, and his introduction, I think, is very excellent as well, just from the standpoint of you see him as this imposing, intimidating figure from the start, and this almost regal presence, if you will, that he brings to the table, as he has even in his arrest some level of authority that he commands, as he tells the Americans to grab his bags as he gets, thrown in jail by them. So it's interesting to see that, like, every bit of this shows the very first inklings of who this character is. This villain who has committed truly terrible crimes has this presence about him that is maybe a strong presence, I would say. So yeah, it was really good in regards to the openers. Rami Malek's character of Douglas Kelley is introduced excellently, and they continue to develop that pretty well. I mean, you see early on he's having this discussion with Howie, who is the translator that's with him. Even though the translator, he realizes pretty early on, is not needed, right? He still keeps him around for a lot of the discussions, more or less, and he's like a sounding board, if you will, for the character of Douglas Kelley. And early on, he has this discussion about the idea that you can be someone who is famous and get all these accolades and groundbreaking research because you are uncovering what made the Germans unique. Why did they commit these atrocities that no one else has committed previously? And he basically says he's in it for the fame, right? And then Howie shoots back and goes, "Is that all there is? That you're just here in it for the money and the fame?" And then Douglas Kelley shoots back to him and says, "Well, all right, let's take the honorable route. We can make sure this never happens again if we get to the bottom of this," right? And so it's interesting that they start off with this almost like not altruistic motive for the protagonist from the start, right? He starts off as someone who is in it for himself, but he can also justify it from the sense of the betterment of all mankind. What are your thoughts on that? And then as Rami Malek's character of Douglas Kelley as a whole?
I like the way that his interaction with Goring progresses. He kind of, in his own mind, begins to humanize him. And it's a multi-step process for him, because the first portion of this movie, he sees him as inhuman. The second portion, he sees him as humanist, like, this guy isn't crazy. And it's almost like the viewer is given this idea that Kelley he's almost convinced in his own mind that this man is not as evil as he thought he once was. And he goes and visits his family, and he's like, this guy has a wife and kid. His family's normal. This guy must be normal. How else would he have gotten married and have a wife that loves him? And then the turning point is when he witnesses the footage of what happened at Auschwitz, as well as the other concentration camps within Germany, or I should say extermination camps. And it breaks him. He's like, there's no way this guy didn't know what was going on. And that's the thing too, is like, keep in mind, up until the Nuremberg Trials, people didn't know what had been going on. Like, the U.S. didn't know that the concentration camps even existed until after we got involved in the war. And so the shock that is portrayed in this film at viewing this, like, the entire audience in that courtroom is just stunned, which is, it's great, because it's what it should be, the witnessing of what occurred there. And
I would say, like, if you haven't seen that footage played out on the screen, it's also shocking for you as the audience. Like, this is interesting from a viewing standpoint, because you in some ways get transported back to that time to witness the events in the eyes of the people who witnessed that same trial.
Yeah,
in a very real sense.
Well, it's interesting too, because they don't just play it, right, and have, like, the audience's reaction be the only thing you see. There is a significant portion of time where they're just playing the footage, and it's like you're watching their screen. And the movie is allowing you to just absorb this information. And I think it just does this film does a really good job of having the audience of this film experience the emotions and the sentiments of the people that they're watching in the film too, like in real time. You're experiencing the sobering effects of witnessing this, the outbursts that certain characters have, the anger, the despair, the what's the word I'm looking for? Depression at certain points in the film, right? The disgust with these Nazis. I also just think it's so interesting as the film progresses that they really do humanize the Nazis. And there are people who will probably dislike that. I think it is essential that it was done, which we'll talk about more once we get into the themes and messages in this film. But the Nazis were men. They were not demons. They were not like some coming up from the depths of hell. They were normal, everyday men who were given power and had adopted an ideology and had come to the point where they had dehumanized certain people. And you get that through Dr. Kelley's journey in this film as he realizes, one, they are human, but two, what they did was still beyond evil. I guess not beyond evil. It was just evil, what they did. And they needed to pay for their crimes.
Yeah, 100%. And so it's and maybe we should just follow that arc a little bit more before we get into discussion of some of the other characters. But because you see kind of how you talked about, it starts off with this idea that he sees them as something else, something completely unique, right? That he's observing, almost like seeing an animal in a cage. And then as the time progresses, he starts to see him as a normal human being, right? You talked about the parents, you talked about his wife and his daughter, for example. And then you have him actually not just see them as people, but being involved in some ways and helping to foster that positive relationship between the father and his family, where he's sneaking letters to them and sneaking letters back to Goring. What were your thoughts on the humanization that Kelley goes through, especially because he's getting some pushback from Howie, who's who's helping to translate, right? Supposedly, at least. And he's saying, like, we shouldn't be doing this. This isn't right. And Kelley basically just goes along with it anyways and does what he wants to do.
I think the humanization is essential. And I think it's one of the things that really pushes this film to being phenomenal. I mean, I think, I don't get too ahead of myself. There are three major themes and ideas I think this film portrays, and I think it does them excellently. One of them is the humanization of the Nazis, the idea how evil can come from anywhere, which is very contrary to what a lot of people are being told today, which is that everyone is inherently good. It's your circumstances that make you wicked, something of that nature, right? The Dr. Kelley comes to the conclusion that these men, sure, their circumstances were different, but they exhibit the similar traits of men you would not call evil. And you get that especially towards the end of the book when you realize, or movie, when you realize this book, the message of it is calling out American politicians, warning the public that this could happen here too. And you get this line towards the end of the film. I'm probably botching it. Well, you do get the quote at the end from Collingwood where he says, "The only clue to what man can do is what has been done." But it's like this idea when he's talking to, I'm forgetting the name of the young officer that follows him around. Howie. Where he essentially says, like, evil doesn't announce itself with, like, horns and demonic marks. It wears a uniform. It sounds reasonable. And that's the conclusion he comes to. And I think this movie does a really good job of showing people like Goring were rational human beings. They were not insane. They were wicked, but they weren't irrational. And I think far too often we want to just paint our enemies as irrational. We don't want to give them credence to why they do what they do. The Nazis were rational beings. This is why Hitler had to convince the German people. He had to take the youth and indoctrinate them, because they are rational, and they need a rational explanation for why they do what they do. If you look at men who commit great evil, they rationalize it in their head. We work so hard as a human race to rationalize the things that we do, whether it is the excessive consumption of alcohol, drugs, pornography. We will rationalize why we do what we do. And Goring did just that. So did the other officers. And that's why Hitler had to rationalize the destruction, the systematic extermination of the Jews. And so he shows that, one, they're human. They have human desires. They have human fears. They're not these inhuman monsters in that sense. They have families. You get that with Goring. His family is, by all measures, pretty normal, right? He's got a daughter. He's got a wife. They don't seem like they have all that much hate towards the Jews. And even though, like, Kelley is seen as an enemy, right? He's an American. She welcomes him into her home once he earns her trust. It's not necessarily that she has this disdain for their enemies. She has a lack of trust at first, which is completely natural. But she welcomes him in as a friend. And even at the end of the film, too, with Stryker, right? You get this very human terror that comes with the thought of death, the thought of being hung, up until the point where he dies. He is not this, like, demon who spits in the face of death. These Nazi officers were terrified of death. Which, like, on a side tangent, right? That's what you get when you have no hope after death. You fear it because it is the end. Yeah. There is nothing after it. And if you do believe in an eternity or a life after death, of course they're going to fear death because of the atrocities that they committed. So,
yeah, either way, it's not a winning stance to be on. Yeah.
No matter what, the idea of death is a terrifying one for these officers, and that you get that really, really well with them. So.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that's important for this too is the context of what is being asked of Kelley in this scenario. And it's that when he has the discussion with the judge who's trying to cause this whole situation to occur, the judge, what's his name? Richard, I believe it is. Jackson. Anyways, Robert H. Jackson. So, another historical figure, but he has this discussion where he's basically like, you're here to do two things. One, you're here to make sure that the prisoners do not commit suicide and don't try to commit suicide, right? Basically give them some level of, like, ease, if you will, to their brains and minds as we go into this process. And two, he's supposed to help them find incriminating evidence and ways to find them out as evil men in court so that this is more or less a slam dunk victory, right? And the goal was, one, to make sure that these people are shown to the world to be criminals, like truly horrendous people, with the secondary goal of hopefully making sure this never happens again, right? Making an example of them. And this was an example that could not be a half-hearted win, because they know at the end of the day, no matter what is said, these guys are getting executed. They're not going away scot-free. But they need everyone in the public opinion to come to that opinion that they deserve to die. And so that is what he is tasking Kelley with, and which is why it's so interesting that Goring is able to convince them, if you will, that he's a normal human being, because that makes it really hard for someone like Kelley to come to the conclusion and provide evidence to the court that this man is a evil person who is doing this because he's just born out of malicious intent, right? He looks like a normal human. He's doing normal human things. He has the normal life. why is it that he is necessarily any more evil than anyone else around him? And that's like something that Kelley has to struggle with.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's probably enough for now on him. We'll get to him, I'm sure, at the end. What are your thoughts on the person we've been discussing around him this whole time, of the main enemy in the Nuremberg Trials, if you will, of Hermann Goring?
Russell Crowe is so good at portraying the roles that he takes on. And in this film, he takes on the role of the villain. I think they do him so well, because you got to keep in mind, this is the second in command of the Third Reich. He helped to overthrow the Weimar Republic, the previous German government. He radicalized the people. And you get mention of like, who wants to follow Hitler? What's the appeal here? Goring was a very charismatic individual. I know there's like reports of Hitler, which is very interesting, that like in day-to-day conversation, he is very reserved. Or not necessarily reserved, I guess like socially awkward is a better way to put it. But the second he went on stage, he like transformed into someone that could captivate an audience. Goring was different in that he was charismatic. He was very highly intelligent. He was able to help sway people. He was in charge of, or in charge of overseeing, at least to some extent, a pretty great extent, the final solution. This was he was an architect behind what happened during World War II. And it's very interesting just the way that he is so confident going into this defense. When he gets handed this document, he's like, "You signed this letter." And he's like, "I did. So what?" Like, I haven't looked into this specifically, but I think the idea that like he was writing these letters in the moment, already thinking ahead to a time when they may lose this war and he may be confronted with this information, and he's already writing these letters in such a way that he wouldn't be held responsible. Or he just knows what he wrote really well, right? A man of this intelligence is probably aware of the information he put down and can twist and contort certain things. But yeah, the fact that the letter is written in such a way that he's even able to deny involvement is crazy, and it adds like this insane element to his character. He's very, very arrogant. He's very, very smart. He's a narcissist. Yeah, I think they do him well. I think they do the fact that he's like able to manipulate Kelley in such a way that Kelley feels bad for him, and he's transporting letters back and forth for him. And he's using his family too to manipulate Kelley. So I think he does it really well. And of course, right, he's too prideful. Even though he knows he's going to die, he wants to be the one who ends his own life. And so that's why he ultimately takes the cyanide pill at the end of the film.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because he is very transparent about a lot of the things that he's doing to Kelley in like a brash way, which is very interesting from the perspective that he's in jail, right? He should be the one that's on his heels saying, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" But instead, he's more or less waiting around for the trial. And he looks at Kelley and says, "I am more or less, I'm your golden ticket, right? I am what's going to prop you up in life to make you something in this world, because you will look at me as a test case example of everything you want, right? Sure, I can do that. That's fine." And he starts to more or less use that and try to feed him what is most beneficial in the moment to help Goring achieve his own ends in this whole scenario, right? And so he's getting the letters. He's discussing with him different things. He's even teaching him magic, right? All of these different small things that show him to be a human, like a normal person, are just so interesting. So Yeah, I'm really a fan of it. I think that they show him very well. Russell Crowe is so good, even to the degree that he talks about friendship, right? And later on in the film, he talks about, oh, you say, like, were we friends? I know we were friends at least at one point, right? And that's a more or less him saying, like, I had you or I got you. Like, you were in my grasp because you related to me in the way that you didn't really want to necessarily follow the orders you were given. So, yeah, it's he does very, very well in this film. Such a fan. But what are your thoughts on, I mean, there's so many different ways we could go at this point. I think what I'm probably leaning toward is, let's talk about Howie, let's talk about Jackson, and then let's try to tie up the themes and messages of the film. So, what are your thoughts on the character of Howie, who's the translator for Douglas Kelley's character? And he helps to be this third party, if you will, during these discussions between Kelley and Goring during a good portion of the film.
I think he might be my favorite character.
Okay.
I think I already thought his character was interesting. The second that they're in that library at the beginning and he pushes back against Kelley's claim of like, oh, it can make us a lot of money, I was like, okay, there's something that he has personal stakes in this.
Mm-hmm.
And that their discussion out in that train station might be my favorite scene in that film. The discussion they have centers around a very powerful theme and message, which is the idea that the only way for evil men to do things or get away with them is for good men to stand by and do nothing. And it places this weight of responsibility on Kelley, and it's a turning point for his character. I think it ought to be a message to every person watching this film that we all hold a responsibility to keep evil men in check, to recognize evil and do something about it. And Kelley's kind of come to the point where he's like, it doesn't matter either way. And I don't know why I keep forgetting his name. Howie tells him, like, this does matter. This matters more than you're willing to admit. Right. It matters. And he turned around and he said, do you know why the Nazis were able to do what they did? Because nobody wanted to do anything about it until it was too late. And you get that saying, I forget what it is, but it's like this guy going like through, first they came for this group, but I wasn't part of that group, so I did nothing. I'm gonna pull it up because I want to see what it is.
And then when they came for me, there was no one to speak for me except for myself. Yeah, the idea that you need to speak up for the people who are disenfranchised around you, even though it might not affect you specifically, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, okay, I found it. They actually have this quote up on the Holocaust Memorial Museum on the East Coast. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And it's that idea that, like, we look at the world around us, and we don't... Granted, we live in a day and age where people are very vocal about what they want, and the internet has enabled that even more. But I think the idea behind it is that good men are standing by and doing nothing. A lot of people now will just sit there and call things out, and yet the actions we're taking are not. We're not taking actions to follow up those words as well as we ought to be. And then the actions we do take are not the right ones. We have a lot of political violence, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And,
well,
and
it's
you,
like,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I think the thing that is crazy to me is that this film really emphasizes the importance of public discourse and how much we need this discourse to happen. And you get that with Justice Jackson, where he talks to him, and there's another great scene where they're out in the Pantheon, just the two of them, and he tells him, he says, why are we doing this trial, right? What's the point of it if you just want me to spy on him? He says, the reason we need to do the trial is because we need to legitimize Germany's defeat. It's like, we just did this 20 years ago, right? Not exactly the same, but we just fought Germany 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We crippled them. We left them decrepit. And in 20 years, they went from this economic slop to a world power where they were taking over Europe single-handedly. I don't think we can beat them a third time. We could kill them right here and now. That would not solve our problem. Clearly, it didn't work before. You get the idea that the definition of insanity is to do something over again and expect a different result.
Right.
And it's true, because the Germans, up until World War II, would not admit defeat. Even though they lost, they would tell people, we weren't defeated. We were cheated out of that war, basically.
Yep. That was the big belief, yeah.
Yeah, and it goes into this idea of German nationalism, where and that's really where the Nazi Party gets their footing in, where you have the Socialists and the Communist Party, and the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, are able to come in and go, they don't care about Germany. We care about Germany. We want to turn Germany into the nation that it once was. I was about to say make Germany great again, but I feel like that has some connotations that I do not want to be making, and I don't believe whatsoever. So just want to make that clear. But that's essentially the message they're preaching. It's very different than the slogan of Make America Great Again. I want to make that clear. They have very different methods and very different things that they're doing than what we see happening today. It's the idea that they're taking something noble, making Germany great, but they have a far sinister motive behind it, right? It's the idea of... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't even say that it's all necessarily sinister from the start either. I mean, and you get this more from like a historical perspective than necessarily from the movie itself. But it's not necessarily clear that a human... the conclusion at the end of the day about these people is that they were other human beings, right? Just like you and I. And so the question is, how do normal human beings go to degrade down to the degree that they are now committing horrible atrocities like this? And some of it, I think, has to do with the quote you just read, right? Where it's like the slow loss or slow devolvement over time can lead to very bad conclusions and very bad opinions on how things ought to be done, what should be the process moving forward, etc., right? And so it's like, this is the question that Douglas Kelley is dealing with as he comes to a full realization of who Hermann Goring is.
It's like the idea I presented earlier, that these are rational human beings. Any rational person wants their country to be great, right? The German people were not insane. They were starving. You have images of them taking wheelbarrows full of money just to buy themselves some food for the day. Their economy was destroyed after World War I, which is insane too. And when you look at like the history of Germany's economy and how quickly they were able to shift their entire country into a military industrial complex using their international railway and the rise of capitalism over like the last 60 years leading up to it. And then they're crushed. And because they lost the war and they had these insane sanctions placed on them that they would never be able to repay, they had no hope for a future, right? And you get, I think the history of World War I, especially the aftermath, is very important when discussing this film, because the way that we handled the Nuremberg Trials and the aftermath of World War II was directly influenced by the way that it was handled after World War I. World War I finishes, the United States withdraws. We kind of just wash our hands of the whole thing, and then you get Britain and France going, we hate Germany, we're going to make them pay for this. Which is why World War II ends, the United States goes, okay, I think we're going to step in this time and try to make sure we get a little bit of a different result here.
Sure.
Because Germany wasn't, regardless of what your thoughts are on the way Germany handled things in World War I, they were not doing anything remotely close to annihilating 6 million Jews. That was not in their battle plan. So clearly something went wrong, to the point where you had a German people who were willing to go along with this. Granted, people didn't know about the concentration or extermination camps for the most part, save for the people working there and the people dying there. Even the people in Auschwitz didn't really know or didn't know about the extermination camps. And they made it as such, because if the people there knew that their end result was to be killed in under 3 months, they would have nothing to lose, and then you'd have a revolt on your hands, which you do get with the Musselmen in Auschwitz. During the Second World War, you have the men. There are two groups within Auschwitz. You have one group that is destined to just die, and they're starved and malnourished, and then told they're going to take a shower, gassed, disposed of. You have a second group called the Musselmen that are hired upon arrival, and they live for 3 months, and their job is to go and dispose of the bodies. And after 3 months, they're killed. They're just executed, so that the word cannot get out as to what is going on. And the Musselmen figured out what was going on, and they led a revolt. I think it was like almost 1,000 people. Got a hold of weapons and holed themselves up in one of the barracks. And it was a big thing that happened in the Auschwitz camps. But they went through to a lot of great lengths to keep this hidden. And I think that also just goes to show people need to rationalize what's going on. And so if the German people know what's happening, if the world knows what's happening, you're getting an insane response to this.
Right.
Anyways, went on a bit of a tangent there.
Yeah,
I think
no, sure. I think that like some of the point of that is how you see this justification for how they got to this place by Hermann Goring, right? Where he says, well, you guys put all of the Japanese in camps and you guys dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese. Why are this is just a fact of war is doing these scenarios. The true atrocities I wasn't aware of, like the really, really bad stuff, that wasn't me. But these other things are a natural part of war. And the only reason that you guys are justified is because you guys won, is basically what you get from Goring during the trial. And this idea of there is no party that's not guilty is what he's holding to, which provides a mental justification in his mind that it's okay what happened because there are other people doing things that are just as bad, right? This idea that it's well, they are doing it too, or they did it first, becomes a justification for bad actions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he calls them labor camps.
Right.
And the thing that's interesting too is that he's not necessarily wrong in the facts that he's stating regarding Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Nagasaki was a purely civilian population. We didn't need to bomb that. Even Hiroshima is the idea, right, that in war, a civilian ought to be placed on the pedestal. Women and children are not to be targeted by combatants. If we target them, then we have thrown out the rules of engagement. This is why during the French and Indian Wars, the Indians were looked at as these enemies against enemies of humanity, of civilization, because they were slaughtering women and children indiscriminately. Regardless of the arguments that these people were settling their land, they were killing people, not combatants, civilians. When civilians become a part of the picture, when they become targeted, you turn the world against you. Because now you're no longer just engaging in a war, you're engaging in slaughter. And
unnecessary death.
Yes. And so, even though, right, his arguments being made are to justify himself and explain why he's innocent, he's not necessarily telling all lies. He's mixing it with this truth that you guys won, so you're not being questioned here. Where's the trial for what happened in Japan? Where's the trial for the Japanese concentration camps? You guys aren't being put on trial. This is hardly fair. Obviously, right, Holocaust is one of the greatest blemishes on human history in terms of the genocide that occurred. In retrospect, though, I think we can look back at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and go, that was a terrible thing that happened. I mean, we've reviewed the Oppenheimer movie on this. I think it handles the guilt of the scientists pretty well in there. But that was another portion of the war, right? We're not here to go over that.
Sure.
But my point is just that he brings it up, and it is another theme in the film that the victor gets to paint the story of what happened. Which is why, all things considered, I think it is very good that we did win this war with Germany, because you don't want Germany painting the picture of this war.
Right.
So, and that goes for all wars too. The person who wins that war gets to write the history books, because guess what? The losing side lost.
Right.
So, anyways, I don't remember exactly where we were with that.
Well, I mean, honestly, that does feed in very well to the final person that I think is worth discussing in this anyways, and that is of Robert Jackson, right? He is the judge who's trying to make sure these court trials occur and wants to see a true condemnation of everything that Germany has done, so that they don't come up and decide to start World War III. What are your thoughts on him as a character? Clearly, he's standing for a public stage presence for everything that occurs. And what's interesting about him is he is here cross-examining Hermann Goring, and in many ways, he actually fails to prosecute him adequately. It's not until the British minister who was there, I believe his name was Fife, I forget his full name, but until he steps in, Goering was going to look like a pretty okay guy, all things considered, which is kind of crazy. What are your thoughts on Jackson's character, though?
So many of the characters in this film are so good, but I think Jackson is probably my second favorite, because
he's General Zod.
I literally, when I started watching this film, I saw his face and went, shoot, I know who that is. Why can't I recognize him? And then I was like, oh, it's because he doesn't have a buzz cut, and he's not sitting there screaming with froth at the mouth. He doesn't have red eyes. But he's so good in what he represents, and I fear that what he is meant to portray and the ideas and themes he speaks on are going to get lost on the audience in comparison to things like the Holocaust and the atrocities that occurred. Because I think the average moviegoer is going to go to this film and go, oh, Holocaust bad, we need to prosecute them. Not necessarily a bad thing to take away, but there's so much more in this film that I think a surface level viewing is going to miss, and especially with Justice Jackson's character, because there is just so much there. So forgive me if I go on for a bit here. Feel free to interrupt. I won't make it necessarily any longer than what I've done already. But first and foremost, I think it is important to note that America as a nation is defined by this idea of what comes after war. You get George Washington and the War for Independence in his conduct with the British military. there are letters that he writes to other military leaders in the Continental Army who are responding in kind to the British torture of American prisoners, American POWs. The British were brutal to their POWs. They did not give a crap. You get this in like the one of the biographies of Andrew Jackson written shortly after his death, because he is a POW. And the story with Jackson is that he's told to clean an officer's boots. First, his older brother is. His older brother says, "I'm a prisoner of war. I expect to be treated as such," right? The British did not view the American colonists as POWs. They said, "You're not an enemy nation. This is an internal conflict. You're being disciplined." And as such, they refused to acknowledge the rules of engagement because they were trying to invalidate the United States Declaration of Independence as a sovereign nation. They were not recognizing them as such, and thus they refused to treat them as prisoners of war. This is why you get the inhumane conditions where they would not feed them, they would not provide them medical attention, they would lock them in a stockade and just let them rot pretty much. And that's how Jackson's older brother dies, from a wound he gets because the soldier cuts him across his arm and hits him in the head. Jackson gets a scar on his hand that almost costs him his life. It gets infected, and his mother dies as well. All three of them get thrown into this stockade. Jackson's not the main focus of this. Jackson is a test case for the treatment of POWs. Washington looks at things like this and says, we cannot do that because the purpose of this war, the rules of engagement, are so inherently tied to our victory as a nation, not just because our goal isn't to just push the British back. Our goal in this war is to establish ourselves as a sovereign nation amidst other sovereign world powers here. Mm-hmm. In order to do so, we have to recognize there are rules of engagement. One of those rules is how you treat your prisoners. The reason I bring that up is because from the very founding of our country, we recognize that there are international laws. In that instance, there are more unspoken, I think, than anything, but it's expected that you treat prisoners of war with respect, and the British very much did not do this. Patriot's a great movie to show this, even though The Patriot, it takes a lot of creative liberties with historical accuracies. Jackson's character, though, is an extension of this sentiment that starts, in my opinion, with the War for Independence, and he recognizes the way that we win this, the way that we prevent this atrocity from happening again, is by going through the proper legal channels. Mm-hmm. World War II, we've come to a point where we as nations, the idea of a nation has become solidified. The idea of territories and boundaries between governing sovereign states exists and has been established very well.
Right.
International law is a thing. And now he's going to use international law to indict this nation's leaders. He is going to use it to incriminate them and to eventually execute them for their crimes against humanity, the war crimes that were committed. And that is his whole purpose in this entire film, is that, yes, we could kill them. We could just shoot them dead, hang them now. Nobody would bat an eye. You know who would? The German people, because they'd go down as martyrs, as he says in this film. If we make them martyrs, we get another Germany from World War II, just worse. It's going to escalate because we beat them down, they come back stronger. We beat them down now again. I don't even want to know what a stronger Germany looks like compared to this World War II version that was fighting Europe on all fronts. They're fighting the Russians or the Soviets. They're fighting the Great Britain. They're fighting France. They're fighting the US. What is that going to look like? And so the only way we do that is by beating them in a court of law. And I really, really like this idea that the war isn't over yet. This film keeps pushing. And you get that with Howie's character not smoking the cigarette. The war is not over because we haven't incriminated these men. And there's so many things that are so good with this theme specifically too, right? You get going back to Goring's character, who says the only reason we're the bad guys is because you won, and that's what they're trying to avoid. You guys aren't the bad guys just because we won. You're the bad guys because you committed crimes against humanity, and the world is going to see that. And that's the message.
Yeah.
That's the entire message of Justice Jackson's character is, I need to incriminate these men. I need to prove, using the courts, that what they did was wrong under the laws that we as a nation have agreed upon. You didn't lose just because, or you're not the bad guys in this war just because you lost. You're the bad guys in this war because what you did was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what he's trying to push. And I think it's interesting because you see that his goals, even though, like, first off, I don't disagree with Jackson's, what he's trying to do at all, but he's also coming at it from a very different perspective than Douglas Kelley is, because Douglas Kelley comes at it from a shrink's perspective. He comes in saying, I am here to understand these people, and a normal shrink would come in and try to help them work through things, right? Trying to understand them better, and to, in some ways, you have to empathize with them to do that. Versus you see Jackson, Robert H. Jackson's character, his whole goal is, I'm going to prove you to be the worst person possible, and I'm going to take whatever I can to do that, right? So even though he is fully justified in proving that the concentration camps and the extermination camps from World War II were bad and they are not okay in any sense of the word, he's coming at this from a very different perspective, where it is that I need to get this no matter what, to the degree that he's even saying that Douglas Kelley needs to violate some of his oaths that he has taken, right? Whether it's client patient privilege, where he's not supposed to talk about what he discusses with his clients. Basically, Jackson says, you're not going to do that. You're going to tell me everything that I need to know in order to achieve these goals. And yeah, I mean, in this case, it definitely makes sense why they would do that. But it's also like a moment of reflection for Kelley, where he goes, hold on, like, this is something I swore an oath to uphold, and I'm not going to do that because I have a greater goal, more or less, to achieve, right? So it's interesting how even in the small ways they have this dynamic of, like, and you get that too with the Pope, right? Like, he's there talking to the Pope not because he wants the church's blessing in authenticity on this court trial. He goes to the Pope because he's like, I need legitimacy, and you're going to provide that for me. And if you don't, well, then I'm going to point out how you supported the Germans before they started this whole debacle. And that makes the Pope scared, so that he does support him, right? So it's a whole thing. It's like, as much as it's definitely true that Jackson's character is trying to do a good thing, he's willing to do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah. I mean, this whole movie, outside of the therapists, the psychiatrists portioned within it, really emphasizes how big a role optics play in politics. What is the perception that people have of you? And like I talked about with the War for Independence, you get that with World War II. What is people's perception of what you're doing? You even get that today, right? With wars that are going on now. What is the world's perception of the war that's ongoing? Regardless of who's right or wrong in that war, the optics matter so much. That's why you have foreign governments getting influencers and political activists and groups to speak about what is going on with their war, right? It's why people were so mad when Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin. They're like, you're giving him legitimacy. We don't want to give him legitimacy here. We don't want him to have good optics. So there's that. I think also, little side note in terms of the idea of, like, the Americans were penalizing the Germans, or not penalizing, incriminating them during these trials. There's that interaction that Kelley has with that superior officer when he's asking about where Goring's family went. And he has that line where he says, I thought we were better than this. And at the end of the film, he goes, you're right. We are better than this. We let them go. Which is just like, in the grand scheme of things of what was going on, it was so minor, but I think it's just like, in a nutshell, the message that Jackson's trying to get across. is that we are better than the Germans. We're not just going to execute you because we won. We're going to show why you deserve to die.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, it's also interesting, even within that, to get that minor microcosm, if you will, where for a moment there they weren't free, right? And then later on, you find out, okay, now they are, and you're right, we are better than this. Is kind of the reaction where you do have someone standing up and saying, "Hold on, this isn't right." Is in some ways, potentially at least, it's indicated by the movie, even if it's not necessarily true, that someone standing up and saying something made a difference, right? And so the idea that you need people to stand up, otherwise bad things will occur, even in a country like America, is what he's talking about. And that's actually the conclusion that Kelley comes to, is that if he doesn't get up and say something, we could have the same problem here. And he's trying to speak against a brick wall, as everyone basically says, yeah, this is not the kind of message we need to be hearing right now. We don't want to be hearing about how America could be just as bad as Germany if we just let ourselves go down the wrong path, right? And that's really leading to the themes of the film. I think it's an appropriate time to discuss those. What is the message of this film? What is it trying to convey? So what are your thoughts?
3 things. There are 3 things I think this film is trying to portray. 1, the importance of the way that we conduct ourselves because of what happens after war. Or in a nutshell, just the importance of grand strategy, if you will. The second is ordinary men, how evil can come from anywhere. And the third and final is the silence of good men. Those 3 components of this film, and how well they're put together and portrayed, and how each of the characters is an expression of that theme or idea, is what I think makes this movie just so phenomenal. The themes in this film are so good, not only just because they're done well, but because I think the themes are very, very prominent, up in our face today, ought to be discussed, and I think they're handled in a good way. Like we talked about, like Mickey 17, how like there's some themes there that may be done well, but it may not necessarily be a theme that we agree with. And films can do that, 100%. Right? You may not agree with the theme that's being pushed, but you can recognize that it was done in such a way that it was effective. It was done well. Right? I think this film not only handles the theme well, I think the themes it handles are not only good themes, I think they are ones that are far too often not discussed enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the whole idea, I mean, there's so many. When I was writing my notes down, I was going back and forth on all these different ways to look at the film, to think about the film. And I think that there is maybe like a surface level approach you can take this film with. And then there's like this deeper understanding. And that's, how do you take the whole discussion and interaction with Goring at the end of the day? Do you take it as this face value discussion with his last statement in court, where he's sitting there and he basically says, I'm no different than the Americans. I did nothing wrong. That wouldn't have been okay if we had won the war, but we lost. And then Jackson's really struggling, trying to prove that Goring is wrong, that he's a bad man. And he isn't really doing a good job of it. And then the British minister, Maxwell Fyfe, comes up and he says, basically, oh, give me a shot at it. And he asks a question that points to the main flaw of Hermann Goring's and who he is, right? And that is, if now, like, basically, now that you know these things occurred, would you go back and do these things again? And you have this moment where Hermann Goring looks at all of his life, right? And sees how, like, all of his meaning, everything that's important to him came from his involvement in this war, and involvement with Hitler, and involvement in all of the things that came as a result of that. And he looks at that and says, if I were to reject that, that means my life is basically like meaningless. Mm-hmm. And so instead he goes, yes, I would do it again. And then he praises Hitler. And then you go, well, like, there's no better way to condemn yourself, right? Because in that moment, everyone goes, yep, you're a bad man. You can't look at everything that happened with the extermination camps and say that's okay, right? Because it's not. And in spite of all of that, he looks with pride in all the things that he's done, and he can't help but say, I would rather acknowledge it to be good in his mind or worth it than to acknowledge that he made a mistake. And that's what ends up condemning him. Now, what's interesting about that is that if you take that at face value, someone might look at like that whole arc, if you will, that Douglas goes through and say, yeah, see, humanizing people is not good. If they do a bad thing, just call them out on it and condemn them. You have to fight, basically. Just get up and fight. And there's another viewpoint where it goes like, we understand that we are all humans and need to call it out, but maybe do it in a way where it's like, you need to understand that we are going down a path already and try to veer off that path and call out that, rather than maybe a more basic rally against evil, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really great symbolism in the film that goes around that, right? The idea that we're fighting this war. I mean, just a couple of things. It's like, one, the arc of Douglas in this is he starts off saying, I'll make money. All right, well, then let's take the noble cause, right? And that'll be like my secondary goal, if you will. And in the whole film, you have this discussion of Hermann Goring knowing that he's doing this for notoriety, and he says, oh yeah, I'll help you out with this. And then at the end of it, after basically saying to him, you know, you betrayed me, even though we were friends, at least at one point, he says, like, what will you be remembered for, right? Will you be remembered for this? And that's what Douglas Kelley has to walk away with, is this realization. Is like, what am I going to be remembered for? Is this thing that I was fighting for, this like idea of being famous and have a lot of money and popular and all that was going to come from this situation, is that really what I want? And instead he takes the other route. He flips his goals in priorities to the second one first. Now he goes, I want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. I need to call out the people who could cause that to happen again in our current environment. And as a result, he basically loses both, right? He doesn't become famous, he doesn't make a lot of money. Instead, he's an alcoholic who ends up dying in the same way that Hermann Goring died, with a cyanide capsule. So it's like, it's for one, a depressing ending, especially for him. But two, it draws a lot of, I guess, questions about the idea of what are you fighting for, and calling out evil. Like, what are your thoughts on that, Andrew?
Well, I think that Kelley's character, right? I've been pretty open with this on the podcast. I'm a Christian. Maverick's Christian. I think Kelley's character is what you get with someone who has no hope for the future. And in his mind, no one's heeding his warnings. He has no point to continue living. They don't really go into this all that well. In my mind, trying to think about why would a man do this, no one's listening to you. Everyone thinks you're insane. You don't make money off the book, which I don't think was necessarily his point at this time anyways. But he's called crazy. After everything he saw, the world does not want to believe that these could be ordinary men. And then he's also looking at ordinary men in power who he's probably seeing similar traits to Goring. This narcissism, this charisma, this ability to talk your way around everything. And he doesn't want to live through a world in which the United States becomes that entity.
Yeah.
And he's witnessed the very depths of the human condition, the wickedness that is within all of us. And he can't, it just doesn't sit well with him. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, you see it. It's like he's butting up against a brick wall, right?
Yeah.
Where he is the doomsday crier and no one's listening to him. And he gets ushered off the stage where they say, hey, you're not being invited back to continue this discussion on radio. You're done. Like, don't be advertising yourself like this. This is not what America wants at the end of this war. And he's just like, well, I'm screwed because I can't get anyone to listen to me. And he becomes an alcoholic. He becomes suicidal. And he ends up taking his own life. Like, it's a really sad ending, because while he is fighting for the right things by the end of the film, it's like, at what cost, right? No one's listening to him.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he's essentially trying to warn them against this ever happening again, and no one will heed his warning. I mean, it'd be like if you were trying to warn someone against the apocalypse and you knew it was coming, or it would. Because again, right, the whole message by the end is if good men stand by and do nothing, this is how something like this goes down. He is trying to make it so the good men don't stand by and do nothing. But the first step to that is to making them aware.
Yeah.
Making them educated. I mean, it's the same problem you have in America today, where people are uneducated. They don't know they don't know the laws. They don't know the importance of certain actions that you can take as an American citizen. An uneducated populace is probably one of the dangerous things you could ever have. Because an uneducated populace is an inactive one. And if they are active, their actions rarely are doing what they should be.
Right. Well, it becomes a game of bread and circuses. What gives you the most benefit for how you act, right?
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. It's a sobering. I mean, like we both threw accolades on this film, right? We both really like it, but it's not like the themes are not heavy. And it really ends with another heavy theme with it in the discussion with Howie, where he's walking away. I mean, there's the whole hanging scene, which is just insane. Even though they don't really show it, it's like they give you just enough that you are still disturbed. But then Howie walks out of the hanging room and pulls out a cigarette, starts to light it, and then instead he throws it away. In some ways signifying that they haven't finished the war, right? They haven't finished fighting. What were your thoughts on that? Do you think that they're making a message simply because the trials hadn't finished? Or do you think it's because they're trying to make a broader statement culturally today?
Yes. It's another reason I like his character, because of the way that they play out certain themes in him. This idea of after war. The war if you accept the idea that Howie does, that the war is not over. One, the war is not over till all of the officers have been tried. He almost kind of gets ahead of himself, and you see that when he walks out and he pulls out the cigarette and then he thinks about it and he's like, no, my personal vendetta may be resolved at this point, because he really hated Stryker. But the war itself is not over. And it's this idea that the only way to keep evil down as a society is to never stop waging that war. Right? Because evil men grasping at power, when power vacuums are created, they're going to rise from ground up. They're going to take that power for themselves. It's exactly what Hitler was, right? He's a nobody painter, failed art school, was speaking in pubs, and rose up to become one of the most powerful men in the world at the time.
Yeah.
That in and of itself just should be insane to people.
Yeah.
That a nobody...
especially because he had a failed coup. The beer hall putsch didn't work. And he still ended up becoming the chancellor of the country, and then the leader, the Fuhrer.
Well, it's right. It's like this idea that he never stopped. Evil will never stop trying to take the advantage. I mean, the Bible talks about Satan as a lion at your door. He never stops pacing the earth. evil, regardless of whether or not you accept the Christian idea of Satan, if you think there is nothing outside of this world, history shows that evil never stops pushing forward. Whether it is in a man, a nation, an ideology, it is always going to be present. There has never been a time in history when evil was not present. If you're a Christian, you would believe it was before the fall, but post that, there has not been a moment in history when it didn't. And in the world today, it is very prevalent. And so Howie's whole character in that scene, I think, is meant to establish the idea that, one, the idea he told Kelley, the train station, the only way the Nazis did this was because good men didn't speak up about it. They didn't stop it. And then two, this idea that the war is never done. And if the war is never done, and the only way to stop evil is to stand up to it, then people like Howie, people like Kelley, people like Jackson have to continually push back against that darkness.
That's true. It's true. What are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film? I think that we've gone pretty deep in this one.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to have a lasting impact?
I went into that theater, and it was so empty. And at first, I didn't have any response to that, because I don't know what this movie's about. I will say, at least it had more people watching it than Tron Ares, because that movie was trash.
True.
But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to have the impact that it should. I think this film is phenomenal. I think that it should be recognized as the greatest movie that's come out this year. This is by far, it is leagues beyond any of the trash that's been put out by Disney. That is just sunshine and roses for the good guys. The themes are weak. The characters are weak. The story is weak. Not only does this movie does a phenomenal job of a historical retelling, but obviously they have some narrative embellishments with like the psychiatrist's role and everything, right? But it's telling a true story with an important message, and it's doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is more than can be said for any movie that's come out that we've reviewed this year. Maybe Thunderbolts, but that one was just mediocre. It was okay. The rest of the gunk that we've reviewed in terms of recent films pale in comparison to this, and yet they're gonna do better, right? Lilo and Stitch is the #1 film this year, and I think it's insane when you consider the message of this film is that an ignorant populace is an inactive one, and the only way for evil to get up and do something is for the populace to stand by and do nothing. You have a populace who doesn't want to watch a film like this. They want to watch a film about a furry blue alien that's a live-action recreation of a Disney film that came out decades ago.
Nice.
The irony is insane.
Yeah.
How ought we as a nation react to something like this? It should be a very sobering moment for us. And unfortunately, I do not think it is going to be.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's a couple reasons for that, and this kind of plays off of what Josiah is asking in the chat, where he says people watched Oppenheimer but not this movie. Like, why is that? And I think the question goes to a couple things. I mean, for sure, it's not as entertaining, right, to see historical films generally, right? Partially because you already know what's going to happen. On the other hand, it's also because, like, usually if you're going to watch a historical film, it's because you already are aware of and interested in that historical event, right? Versus there's this whole other fandom that goes around, say, Marvel and, like, the fantastical nature of being a superhero. And everyone wants to be inspired to be their own superhero in their own life, right? If you want to do the Disney-esque dance. So there's that. The other aspect of it, too, is that, for example, with Oppenheimer, right, which is a historical film, that one I think has more to do with Christopher Nolan, in my opinion, than anything else, just because Christopher Nolan is known to be a very successful creator of content that has consistently batted above average in regards to the films that he creates. And you see that because the Odyssey, which has not even come out yet, they've pre-sold tickets to some of those showings, and they're already sold out. They sold out the day they were released, right? And so I would say a good portion of that, specifically for the Oppenheimer example, is because everyone knows Christopher Nolan makes good films, and they want to see that. Versus this, I mean, Vanderbilt, I know he's made other films in the past, but I've not personally watched those. I'm not as aware of his content. There's nothing that I've seen from him that makes me go, oh my goodness, I'm hitting a home run here with this compared to other films. So, is this one a home run? In my opinion, yes. In Andrew's opinion, of course. And there's deep themes, very important discussions being had because of that. But is he as well known as Christopher Nolan? In no way. Anyways, I don't know if you have more to say on that, Andrew.
Well, I mean, there was a film we reviewed recently that was similar in the irony of what it... Gladiator. When we reviewed Gladiator, I had a similar response to that film, in that there are messages and themes that are ironic considering the audience. In Gladiator, the question he poses to both the audience in film and the audience that's watching the film is, are you not entertained? Which is just... There's a reason that movie is the only film I've given a 9 out of 9 on this podcast. And that line right there, I think, encapsulates so much of that film. Not to go on the Gladiator route right now, right? We've already reviewed that. You can go listen to that podcast. But it's a phenomenal movie. This movie is also phenomenal. I don't know if this is a trend. I'd have to think about it more. But the idea that there's almost like meta themes within these films that are being presented just make them so interesting and captivating. And the meta themes of this are very prominent, and unfortunately I think are not going to be... They're going to be lost on a lot of people who may go watch this. But I mean, I think I said this at the beginning of the podcast. I think every eligible adult in the United States for voting should be watching this film. One, the Holocaust and World War II were major events in human history. The Nuremberg Trials were an outflowing of that. I think World War II history is important. It is something that adults should be aware of. Not just, German... Like, the stereotypical knowledge of World War II is the Jews were killed, Nazis were bad. You're missing so much of the point there. The most important part of that story is, how did Germany become the Germany that we know of in history? Because it wasn't just this switch overnight. It wasn't just these wicked, evil people that were subhuman and we couldn't possibly get there. No. Germany was by all means a rational people with politics and a government, and they touch on this in the film. They were elected. They didn't just necessarily seize power in the sense of like crossing the Rubicon. They used the system that was in place and then took power from there. Like, I think far too often we look at that and we just think of it like a crossing the Rubicon moment with Julius Caesar. That is a way you can take power, right? It's not what happened there. And it's highly unlikely that something like that is going to happen in modern politics.
Yeah.
So,
well, I sure hope not.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, we're not gonna get a sudden moment. It's gonna be the slow encroachment until you realize that you fully come over to a side you don't want to be on, and that's
it's
what
like
the
the
message
idea
of this film is about.
A frog boiling in water doesn't realize what's happening till it's too late. So the question is, are you the frog?
And I
And
guess
if
you'll have to
so-
answer that for yourself.
How will you find out? So,
Or how do you check to make sure so that you don't boil alive?
yeah, wake
There
up.
you go. I mean, I will say, for this film, in spite of the fact that neither of us saw a good showing in the theater, at least the people who saw it in Toronto at the International Film Festival liked it a lot. It got a 4-minute standing ovation, which is one of the longest standing ovations in the history of the Toronto International Film Festival. So, you know, at least the people in... I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the general film industry's rating and reviewing of things, but the fact that it got that high of a standing ovation for so long at least is like one thing I could get behind and say, yeah, it probably deserved that, because that it is a very sobering movie, but a very telling movie with a lot of really good, important messages for us to take away. And
Yeah,
I think that's where we're going to leave it. So go watch it. If you haven't watched it, it's definitely worth your time. And that's one of the few times you'll hear that on this podcast.
yeah.
So,
I mean,
it.
Yeah.
I
I could probably keep talking, but
yeah, we're gonna leave it at that. So we hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back, as we always are, next week. We'll see you all then.